history, because we got to get out the feelings part. Because if it were the feelings, how many politicians are really worthy of our trust and respect?
Well, that's the question.
Dr. Anthony Montero in studio. Years
That's
boys.
the question.
Welcome.
You know what I'm saying, Professor Smith? Can I call you Aaron?
You call me anything. It don't even matter. Just don't call me wacky low life dog like Trump did to Omarosa, and we all right.
Okay, but we were talking about your perspective versus Mo's perspective. Mm-hmm. And Mo said, I can't trust her. And you said, we have to think strategically. We don't have to like her. She might serve our interests in spite of the fact of the way we feel about her. And Mo said that the interests of black folk has to be based upon trust, because we don't have the power to determine what she will do. We don't have the money. We don't have the political connections. Mm-hmm. So we have to try. You say, but let's see how it plays out. So I think that's a very interesting conversation. Mm-hmm. And it's a question about criteria.
I hear you.
How do we decide who is on our side and who we unite with? And that's the ultimate, and then it's another question, short term, medium term, and long term. Mm-hmm. If the short term objective is to get Trump out of office, then suppose we get him out of office. Then what?
We got to get them Pence tapes. She got 200.
Yeah, but then what? Then what?
No, that is the bigger question, is what do we do?
And, I know Mo, and I know Mo is always thinking about ultimate liberation.
Oh, yeah, Mo was on point.
Yeah, and I think you were saying, I'm not saying you're not thinking about ultimate liberation. You're thinking about the steps that we have to take to get there. And I'm just saying, that's a great debate. It's an old debate, by the way.
The example I like to use, I always say World War II, how people can have different geographic locations, different religions, different economic systems, different political affiliations. Mm-hmm. If I have a disagreement with somebody and you have a disagreement with them, y'all don't like Hitler, I don't like Hitler, we need to talk. We need to build. Yeah. Even if I don't trust you. Even if I know at a future point in history, we're going to do battle against one another. Today, we're going to link arms to conquer this common enemy, and we're going to deal with that when the time comes.
Let me give you an example from modern African history. In 1961, a low-level military person in the Congolese army named Joseph Mobutu, united with the CIA and Belgium in imperialism and British imperialism to capture and kill the first president of the Congo, Patrice Lumumba.
They call traitors Mobutus.
Yeah, true. Now, the question becomes, can we ever trust Joseph Mobutu?
Oh, no, there's a point of no return.
Yeah. You said, okay.
That's why I asked Mo that question. That's why I said, what did she do? Because he said traitor. And I said, what concrete example, what did she do to make you throw her away forever? And he said she campaigned with him. And I'm like,
But let's go back to the example. You gave the example of World War II. Mm-hmm. The enemy of my enemy can be my friend.
At least temporarily.
Yeah, right. Can be my friend. I'm giving an example of an act that is so egregious that there is no comeback. And I would say, as long as Joe, who became Mobutu Sese Seko, he changed his name to give himself an African authenticity. Mm-hmm. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But for me, I could never reconcile with Joseph Mobutu, and up to this day.
Oh, I'm with you on that.
You know what I'm saying?
That's like William O'Neill. When Fred Hampton Jr. was here, we talked about Eugene Roberts, William O'Neill. But that's why I kept asking, did Omarosa enter this lane? Because I couldn't remember the time where Omarosa...
Let me give you another example, apropos to the example you just mentioned about O'Neill. I have a friend, a very, very good friend, who was a member and the field secretary of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party.
Oh, wow.
She was approached by a filmmaker and his representatives who was doing a film on O'Neill. And they wanted her to be a consultant and all that type of thing. She refused. She would not have anything to do with anything associated with his name.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people, I heard callers saying, well, when do we welcome them back into the, quote, family? Some people can never be readmitted.
That's a stretch.
And
I'm roast at the cookout. I heard the sister Gwen called up and said, I ain't invited her to the cookout, but I will use her and see what we can get out of it in common enemy. But a lot of people felt, they shied away from, like you said, fully letting her back in because she doesn't seem to be able to be trusted.
And then you get to Mo's point, the question of the basic character.
Mm-hmm.
What are your intentions in this particular moment? And how do they fit in, perhaps, to a personal agenda of enrichment and fame? And so now you're black, but you weren't black a month ago.
But was she? Because she was the one who did the executive order for the HBCUs. And if I'm in a situation where I have a bunch of white people around me and people say, what is your initiative? What is your interest? What are you pushing? And I stand and say HBCUs.
Well, I'm
kind of outing myself as not the cooperative, compromising, shucking and jiving, skinning and Negro from day one.
But Aaron, the deeper question is that enough?
On both sides, is it enough to make her a traitor, or is it enough to make her with the people?
Yes, because traitors have to do something to keep some standing with their own people, and I put quotes around that because, if we define an enemy, and a person is on the side of the enemy, and let us say she or he and the enemy fall out, and now they come to us for support. I mean, I would agree with those people that say it's not been enough time and we don't know enough. And you mentioned the NBC interview. Yeah, NBC. That was the filter through which we came to know her situation as told by her. I haven't heard her interviewed by a black journalist.
No, she did. She did a couple, yeah.
Okay, all right. I'm glad to hear that. But I'm still
probably she did a second. But this is the thing. I don't know if we can have it both ways.
Yeah.
Because people like to say the HBCU thing, she was just, doing politics then.
Maybe.
But I'm saying the same thing with the campaigning. I'm saying the same thing you're saying. I'm saying, she was just doing what she had to do what she had to make people think. I'm using the same argument you used with the HBCU initiative.
Let me just say this. If we, as we are arguing, that Trump is an existential threat to black folk, if that is the case.
Pence too.
Yeah. An existential threat. And she was on the side of an existential threat for multiple years, not just 1 year, not just for a campaign, for multiple years. And now, suddenly, she falls out with the existential threat. There are more questions that have to be asked, than are apparent.
But there's two things that need to be mentioned. If you say suddenly, that means all the tapes have to be recent. If she has 200 tapes, then it's not all of a sudden. If these tapes go back the length of the relationship, apparently.
So you're arguing. Arguing.
Let me make one more point. Okay. That's one part. So suddenly is really not an accurate description of what's going on here. If she didn't have a change of heart in the last minute, if she has 200 tapes, this looks a lot more like sitting by the door than it does a sudden change of heart based on circumstances. The other thing is the same way you could say siding with for years, you could say on the inside for years and make it a positive.
Well, you see,
you can say she's been on the inside for years.
Yeah.
That changes it.
Yeah.
Now it's like, now it's a good thing how long she's been there.
But we don't know either to be the case.
But we know she's doing a press run.
No, we are assuming that those 200 tapes were done to ultimately subvert Trump. That's an assumption. And I'm not prepared.
What's the other possible?
Well, she could be taping to write a book. That she has a narrative.
Okay,
well,
maybe. No,
yeah,
if somebody would do it, it would be Omarosa.
But you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I would say that
it's a lot of tapes, though.
We should be very careful with the assumptions that we proceed from.
No,
and when
right about that.
When you take a person who has demonstrated no loyalty to any side, certainly not to black freedom, you understand what I'm saying? We should be more than careful in how we embrace that person and even look upon them as a tactical or strategic ally in a larger struggle. I would be careful with that.
No, I agree.
You see what I'm saying?
I'm Cardi B. I'm Cardi B all the way with it. I'm going to be careful with Omarosa.
Yeah.
But I'm saying being careful is very different than writing somebody off. I agree with you. We need to take heed on what we enter in. We don't need to jump to trust her. That is proven. She's proven that on either side. Nobody should jump to trust Omarosa. But that's very different than taking that emotional, detached stance that we don't benefit from information by saying, I'm done with her. Or even like Mo said, I ain't paying no attention. We need to pay attention to her.
Well, I would say this.
So you know it could be a potential threat in the future.
I think there's validity in the argument of those who either say, as Mo said, or as others say, I'm going to keep her at arm's length.
Oh, I'm doing that too.
You see what I'm saying? Now,
we agree on that.
You could have a different tactical position, but everybody is not committed to tactical alliances. They're committed to more strategic and long-term alliances. And
I don't know if that makes it more strategic, but I appreciate the character part would make a long-term consideration more important.
Yes.
But it's very strategic to have a short-term alliance.
I consider that tactics.
I hear you. Okay, now I understand the delineation you're making. Tactics versus strategy. Say, okay, and I got you.
A strategic alliance is a deeper alliance.
Got you.
And as you mentioned, that politics is war without bloodshed, and we are in a state of ideological and political warfare. I don't think we all agree on who is the enemy, nor do we all agree upon what are the strategic objectives of our struggle. And that's why we need this debate, this discussion,
that's a good point.
This public sphere, as I would call it, the black public sphere, where we talk about what is in our interest. And I'm not against tactical alliances, but tactical alliances for me are with forces that can make a difference. If we align as black people, not as Aaron or Tony with this or the other black person, but with forces comparable to the forces of black liberation, we could say, well, we're making a short-term tactical alliance. A lot of people say voting the lesser of two evils is a tactical alliance. The Democratic Party has betrayed us over and over and over again, but we vote the lesser of two evils. Other people would say, well, that is a tactic that has not served us because it is not connected to a longer-term strategic goal or objective. I think we got a lot to discuss.
No, that's a great comparison, because I do see some of the same splintering along the lines of electoral politics that I do with this current, more popular situation with Ambrose and her book. But it's a lot of similarities there. Where people are like, what about the long term? What are your objectives? Why cooperate now if in the long term without? So no, this is very interesting. We're going to get to the text after the break. We're not going anywhere. But this is a great conversation that you only get here. So tomorrow at Founders Day, when we talk about, get your membership, you should support independent black media, you can understand that this conversation is going to be had on no other major media platform whatsoever. You can look down your whole dial.
In the world.
Television. You're not hearing this kind of nuance and delineation. We were taking turns to talk. Not the Mona Scott way where we, yell at each other and pour drinks on each other and all that. This is real intellectual discussion that can help to inform and edify other people's opinion and perspective based on the information, and even the difference, like Brother Shamari said, in that friction is where a lot of learning takes place. So we got Brother Dr. Anthony Montero in studio here at Du Bois. We're going to get right into the book on the other side of the break. I am Aaron Smith, rapping professor, Queen Kuwait's a super producer, JB Young Phenom. You're waking up with Word, y'all.
Health. Moravia Health Home Care Service are an excellent option for individuals who need medical attention or even non-medical assistance with daily activities, but would rather receive this care in the comfort of their own homes. Make this change today. Come and experience Moravia Health for yourself. Call Moravia Health at 215-717-8650 or visit moraviahealth.com. Moravia Health, because there's no place like home.
Children have the right to enjoy a safe and peaceful summer. Let's talk to each other instead of reaching for guns. So a simple argument won't end up in tragedy with another child taken from us. Sheriff Jewel Williams will be out spreading the word this summer. Let's talk it out. Don't shoot it out. The sheriff's office will give away free gun locks to anyone who will take a gun safety pledge and promise to try and talk it out. Don't shoot it out. If you see him, take the pledge. We'll put your photo on the sheriff's office Facebook page. So join the Summer of Peace Posse. Get a free gun lock and take the pledge. Let's talk it out. Don't shoot it out.
You're listening to Wake Up with WURD on WURD Radio, 96.1 FM and 900 AM WURD, Independent Black Media.
Independent Black Media, 900 AM, 96.1 FM, WURD, WURDradio.com. Listen live anytime and log on. Tomorrow, Founders Day. Aaron Smith, Young Fields, the rapping professor. Queen Kawesa, super producer, put some respect on her name. JB, Young Phenom on the board. And in studio, Dr. Anthony Montero, Year of Du Bois. We just had a wonderful discussion about strategy, tactics, character, and the liberation of African people. And now, in true Du Boisian fashion, we're going to make sure that we go into the history and into the text to make sure we validate, corroborate, and further inform your opinions with the written word.
Well, at least to give us something to think about. And, these last few weeks we've been dealing with Du Bois's dealing with black women.
Yes.
And the two women that we've dealt with in the last two sessions were Josie from rural Tennessee and Zora from Alabama, the backwoods of Alabama. Today I'd like to deal with a woman that's very apropos to what we're talking about. Her name is Sara Andrews. And it's from a novel called The Dark Princess. And just to give you an idea of what it's about a man named Matthew Towns who was studying at a medical school in New York, and he was studying to be a gynecologist. And they suddenly decided that a black man could not study gynecology because he might come in contact with white women. So he became angry and not only left medical school, but he left the United States. He finds himself in Berlin. He hooks up with a group of Asians and North Africans who are forming a group to overthrow Western colonialism and imperialism. But the question was for him, they asked him, are black people really ready to be a part of such a grand strategy of liberation of humanity? And so he goes back to the United States to find out and empirically verify that black people's freedom struggle is indeed a part of the global anti-colonial movement. So, but in the course of all of this, he becomes a Pullman porter, and he carries out a kind of act on one of these trains that is filled with Klansmen, and a number of the Klansmen are killed, and he is arrested and imprisoned. But he comes in contact with a woman named Sara Andrews on the south side of Chicago. This is in the mid-1920s. So let me just start. Please. The question of character, of principles, of morality, of long and short-term objectives come into play. Sara Andrews was thin, small, well-tailored. Only at second glance would you notice that she was black. She was not beautiful, but she gave an impression of cleanliness, order, cold, clean, hardness, and unusual efficiency. She wore a black crepe dress with crisp white organdy collar and cuffs, a chiffon hose, and short-trimmed hair. Altogether, she was pleasing, but a trifle disconcerting to look at. Men always turned to gaze at her, but they did not attempt to flirt, at least not more than once. Miss Andrews was self-made and independent. She had been born in Indiana of a union of a colored chambermaid in the local hotel and a white German cook. The two had been duly married and duly divorced after the cook went on a visit to Germany and never returned. Then her mother died, and this girl fought her way through school. She forced herself into the local business college, and she fought off men with a fierceness and a determination that scared them. It became thoroughly understood in Richmond that you couldn't fool with Sara Andrews. Local Lotharios gave up trying. Only fresh, Lotharios means playboys.
No, I'm glad you filled that in. 'Cause a lot of people probably like, I can't call in and ask, but what did he just say?
Yeah. Local playboys gave up trying. Only fresh strangers essayed, and they received direct and final information. She slapped one drummer publicly in the post office and nearly upset evening prayer at St. Luke's to the discomfiture of a pious deacon who sat beside her and was praying with hands. For a long time, she was the only colored person in the town, except a few laborers. And although most without social life or intimate friends, she became a stenographer at the dry goods emporium at a salary which was regarded as fabulous for a young woman. Then Southern Negroes began to filter in as laborers, and the color line appeared, broad and clear, in the town. Sara Andrews could have ignored it and walked across so far as soda fountains and movie theaters were concerned, but she wouldn't. A local druggist wanted to marry her and go away. She refused and suddenly gave up her job and went to Chicago. There, in 1922, she became secretary to the Honorable Sammy Scott, the WURD leader.
Wow.
And thus begins a political struggle. I just want to read this last part, because the question in Chicago in the 1920s and 30s is whether or not black people could elect a member of the U.S. Congress. Now, you remember in 1901, the last black member of the U.S. House of Representatives was kicked out, literally.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You see,
okay.
and this is the effects of the defeat of Reconstruction. So then you get this northern movement of blacks from Alabama and Mississippi and Arkansas,
Great Migration, right?
yes, to Chicago. And so on the south side, you have what is known as the Black Belt. And Sammy Scott is the WURD leader who also aspires to be a congressman and to marry Sara Andrews as a part of his political strategy.
He got a lot of goals.
Yeah, a lot going on there. So now just dig this part. Sara had all of concern the most difficult road and the most brilliant prospects. This is Sara. She saw wealth, power, social triumph ahead if she could elect Matthew Towns, this is a young man that left the United States, to Congress. But she knew just how difficult it would be to beat the Republican machine with its money and organization. At that time, the Republicans in the black community are what the Democrats are today. So she has to go up against the machine. Her first task was to hold the Negro vote back of Matthew. That was easy so long as he was a regular Republican, not an insurgent. When he bolted Sammy's machine, Sara had to capitalize race pride and resentment against the Doolittle machine downtown and Sammy. She continued to insist that Matthew was a good Republican, not a Sammy Scott henchman. For a while, her success here was overwhelming. But could she hold it 3 months with hungry editors and grafting henchmen? And then Du Bois says finally, all these things carry new dimensions to the lives of a class of colored women who had been hitherto bound chiefly to their kitchens and their churches. Women's new sphere, the new area of which women were becoming active, of which they had read something in the papers, had hitherto meant little to them. They were still under the spell of the old housework, except as they raised money in the churches. Here was the work, newer and more interesting than church work. The colored ministers protested, but were afraid to protest too much, because many of Sara's political followers were still their best church workers, and they dared not say or do too much to alienate them. Sara worked feverishly during March because she knew perfectly well that the real difficulty lay ahead. The election of Matthew might involve voting not only against Sammy's machine, but against the Republican ticket and with the farmer labor group, and possibly even voting with the Democrats. I'll stop there. You see, what Sara Andrews represented was the mobilization of a hitherto unrecognized group in the black community, black women, who had been the principal support of the main institution, the black church, but were told to remain out of politics. Now, black women in general had only recently won the vote in the United States. Now, that didn't mean that black women would have the full right to exercise that vote. So it fell upon Sara in her attempt to elect Matthew Towns, this young man who was in prison and she helped to get out of prison, to elect him over Sammy. And ultimately, and this is an interesting part of this story, she marries Matthew.
Oh, wow.
But it was a loveless marriage. It was a marriage to achieve her political objective.
Some of y'all guilty of that now. We're going to stop there. But some of y'all know, I've heard it said, some people say marriage, is a business. It's a business arrangement. Some people say that, Some people have been married longer than other people who don't get caught up in the emotional. We talk about that emotional versus the practical. Some of y'all, long-term marriages is because y'all extremely practical, not because y'all so in love. Let me just make it plain there. You got the children, you got the mortgage, it's cheaper to keep her, boy. It's cheaper to keep her.
And there's not only one kind of marriage.
That's right.
There's marriages for love and there's marriages for political and economic and financial purposes.
And some brothers I know learned quick that some people think they're not married because they didn't buy a ring, but by the time they get to court, the judge is like, how long she been living there? How many kids y'all got? Let me talk to you about common law. But in closing, I do want to make one quick announcement. Queen Quasar shared with me a story about the White House reporter April Ryan, who currently has a bodyguard, and she was saying that Sarah Huckabee Sanders should pay the bill. This idea of this attack on these sisters in politics has to become a bipartisan issue. The sisters are under attack. People are hiring, reporters are hiring bodyguards. Reporters that work at Capitol Hill are hiring bodyguards. Any aggression against the sisters, wacky, dog, lowlife, any of that type of rhetoric is extremely dangerous in this climate.
Aaron, may I just interrupt you?
Please, I'm getting the last word. You got the last word.
Yeah, thank you. The question is, what is going on in the political realm in this country where both sides are weaponizing with words and actual weapons? This looks something like a political civil war.
Dr. Anthony Montero. I am Aaron Smith, the rapping professor. Tomorrow, Central Branch of the Free Library, Founders Day. Celebrate. Queen Quasar, super producer JB on the boards. Thank y'all. Who's up next?